The chill wind along the Tanana River felt familiar to Daniel Walker. It cut through the pine trees, rattled the traps he'd set earlier, and stung his face with that kind of Alaskan honesty he'd grown to respect. His camp was simple: a weatherproof tarp, a small stove, a rack for drying fish. A half-cleaned snowshoe hare hung beside the fire ring. Daniel had always loved these quiet moments. There was no phone service, no crowds, no empty chatter. Just a man, a knife, and the land. That peace ended when a glow washed over the treetops. At first he thought it was an aircraft off course, but the shape was wrong. A wide oval with a central ridge, no tail, no running lights. It moved like nothing built on Earth. He stood, hand on his belt knife, scanning the clearing. The ship settled onto the snow with barely a hiss. Pine needles trembled, but the machine itself made no engine noise. The ramp extended, mechanical but graceful, and a figure descended. Daniel tried to place the creature. It looked vaguely human, with 2 arms, 2 legs, but its proportions were taller, leaner, skin a soft shade of blue. Its eyes were dark and calm, studying him with what Daniel could only read as caution. "I am Zevik," the alien said, voice even and surprisingly clear. "You are Daniel Walker." Daniel shifted his weight. "Yeah, I'm Walker. Who are you with?" Zevik stepped closer, folding his hands behind his back. "I represent the Seroth Dominion. We have reviewed your world's data, especially your wilderness survival methods. You have relevant experience." Daniel frowned. "For what exactly?" Zevik's gaze did not waver. "A colony on Kavor is in jeopardy. The ecosystem there is lethal. Our trained soldiers do not last. We need someone who knows how to stay alive where everything wants you dead." Daniel snorted. "So, what? You picked a guy who teaches people to sleep in a snow cave and boil river water?" Zevik inclined his head. "Yes. Your resilience, improvisation, and ability to guide others under pressure are unmatched in our analysis." Daniel looked past Zevik at the ship. It hummed with energy, subtle lines glowing across its hull. His pulse thumped harder than a charging moose, but he forced himself to think straight. "If I say no," he asked. Zevik paused. "We would search elsewhere, but time is scarce, and the colony's population is at risk." Daniel weighed the thought of going back to his quiet camp, smoking his rabbit, waking up in the same woods tomorrow. It felt too small all of a sudden. He sighed. "How long would I be gone?" "Time is relative," Zevik answered. "But your people will still be here when you return." Daniel studied him, the blue skin, the steady voice, the alien confidence that still somehow respected him. "Well," he muttered, wiping his hands on a rag, "if you're going to ask for help, might as well ask a professional." Zevik offered a faint nod that might have been approval. Daniel stepped forward, past the hare, past the tarp, into the mouth of the ship. He paused once to look back at the snow and the river glinting between dark pines, then followed Zevik inside. The ramp lifted, the air sealed around them, and Daniel's world, the only one he had ever known, shrank to a pinpoint behind him. The starship carried Daniel through a corridor of starlight that felt endless. The cockpit displayed a view of clustered blue stars against a river of darkness, patterns he could barely name. Zevik stood beside him, studying readouts in a language of shifting glyphs. Daniel's hands itched to fiddle with a compass or a bow drill, something real, but there was nothing to do except listen. "Kavor," Zevik explained, tapping a 3-dimensional display, "is a classified mining colony. We founded it on the edge of the Nareth Belt, rich in rare minerals, but the environment is unforgiving." Daniel studied the projected image. Kavor looked scorched. Its crust showed fault lines like claw marks, and its forests appeared thin, brittle, choked by dust storms. "What happened to your people there?" Daniel asked. "Native predators," Zevik answered. "Hazardous air, food shortages. Several hundred civilians are unaccounted for. Our military contingents have tried rescue and extraction, but they are trained to conquer, not to endure. Daniel raised an eyebrow. And you think I can fix that? Zevik nodded. We believe you can teach them. We have no other option. Daniel exhaled, staring at the world outside. He'd survived Alaska's worst winters, rattlesnakes in the Sonoran Desert, and even a flash flood in the Rockies. But none of that compared to the idea of stepping onto an alien planet crawling with things that could eat him. What's the timeline? He asked. We land in 12 hours, Zevik replied. You will have 1 standard week to locate survivors, stabilize them, and assist in an extraction. Daniel crossed his arms. And if I refuse the mission once I see the place? Zevik's face was unreadable. I cannot compel you, Daniel Walker, but I believe you will act. The way Zevik said act made Daniel look at him twice. There was a quiet respect there, almost a plea. Zevik turned away, signaling the crew to prepare. Daniel watched the alien soldiers check gear he didn't even recognize. Angular rifles, thin body armor, packs sealed by a hiss of energy. They all looked well-drilled, confident, but missing something Daniel knew how to teach. They had no instincts for dirt under their fingernails, or reading the wind, or setting a deadfall trap. As the ship angled toward Cavour, Daniel went over the plan one more time. Find the civilians. Keep them alive. Teach the soldiers. Make it back. He shook his head, half laughing to himself. Welcome to the job, Walker, he muttered. Through the viewport, Cavour grew larger, its surface streaked with rust-brown ridges and valleys where no green life thrived. Daniel's pulse beat steady as he gripped the shoulder straps of his harness. He'd faced grizzly bears before. Maybe this wouldn't be so different. Maybe. The starship descended through Cavour's turbulent upper atmosphere, rattled by crosswinds and static bursts. Daniel peered through the side viewport, taking in a surface that looked scarred and wild, a lattice of scorched plains broken by splintered ridges and deep ravines. Dark columns of smoke rose from burned forest patches, swirling into red-gray skies. Zevik guided him to a staging deck crowded with Cerothian soldiers checking their gear. Their weapons looked polished and advanced, but the troops wore the rigid, uneasy expressions of people trained for clean deployments, not the messy chaos Daniel could already sense waiting below. A voice on the comms barked an alien dialect Daniel couldn't follow, then Zevik translated. Landing zone confirmed. 20 kilometers from the last known location of the survivors. Be prepared to move immediately. Daniel nodded, checking the improvised pack he'd assembled from the ship's supplies. A water filtration kit, signaling flares, protein rations, spare batteries. Primitive by their standards, maybe, but familiar to him. As the landing struts touched down, a blast of acrid wind surged inside the cargo bay. It carried a bite like chemicals mixed with rot, clawing at Daniel's throat until he sealed his mask. He stepped onto the soil of Cavour. Beneath his boots, the ground felt crusted, baked and broken, as if scorched again and again by lightning. The sparse plants nearby looked stunted, their leaves gray-green and thorny. Daniel studied the ridgelines, mapping the drainage patterns, the likely animal tracks. Which way to the settlement? He asked. Zevik gestured southwest. There, 2 days' march at best. Daniel scanned the alien soldiers. He could tell from their posture they were used to speed, not caution, but here speed would get them killed. We'll move along this gully, Daniel said, pointing. Stay off the ridgelines. You'll silhouette yourselves against the horizon. You'll be picked off. One of the soldiers, a tall one named Tavik, frowned. Why not take the faster path? The air is stable near the ridge. Daniel shook his head. Predators will hunt from high ground. You don't want to look like a target. Trust me. Zevik nodded. You will lead. We will follow. As they began to advance, Daniel watched the Cerothians try to place their feet like he did, awkward at first, but slowly adjusting. Hours passed with only the howling wind for company. Daniel's eyes kept darting for movement among the scorched rocks. Once he glimpsed something, a flash of mottled scales, a ridge of horns, before it vanished behind boulders. He halted the column. "Something's tracking us," he warned. Zevik looked alarmed. "Can you identify it?" Daniel squinted toward the ravine's far wall. "No, but it's big, and it's patient. Keep tight, stay quiet, and don't break from the group." That night they set a defensive camp on high ground behind a fallen metal pylon. Daniel showed them how to ring the perimeter with triple arms made from spare wire and rattling scrap. The soldiers, awkwardly at first, learned to listen for the wind, to use the rocks for cover, to breathe with less noise. Lying awake beneath a torn section of sky, Daniel studied the stars. Cavor's constellations were alien, but the pattern of survival felt the same. He let the night sounds settle into his bones, steady and sharp, as he planned how to move again at dawn. At first light, Daniel guided the Cerothian team down the gully, where the air tasted of char and mineral. They moved single file, stepping around blackened trunks and splintered boulders. Cavor's morning was harsh, a sky the color of rust pressed low against their helmets. Daniel kept a watchful eye on the ridge lines. A small herd of horned, six-legged grazers stood like statues on the far slope, warily observing their passage, then bounded away on muscled legs that cracked the brittle ground. As they approached the first settlement marker, a tilted metal pole with half-melted lettering, Daniel made them pause. He crouched, studying prints in the ash, claw marks, 4 toes, long tail dragged behind. He gestured Tavik closer. "These," Daniel said, pointing, "are fresh. Big predator. Maybe 10 meters long, moving slow, probably hunting." Tavik swallowed hard. "Is it still here?" "Maybe, let's not find out." They moved past the broken pole and into the settlement's perimeter. The place was a mess of collapsed prefab structures and twisted walkways. Solar panels hung shattered, catching only shards of reddish daylight. It looked like the bones of a town. Inside the largest dome, Daniel scanned for survivors. The place stank of old fuel and stale rations. Bits of metal crunched under his boots. The Cerothian soldiers spread out, weapons at the ready, checking corners. Daniel knelt by a row of ration crates, noting teeth marks on the plastic. Someone, or something, had scavenged here recently. He saw a name scribbled on a torn badge in a language he could read: Martin. People were definitely alive here, Daniel said. And not long ago. Zevik joined him, scanning the wreckage. "We must locate them before nightfall." Daniel glanced around. "This place is no shelter. Too open, too many entry points. We'll sweep for bodies, grab any working supplies, and move on before dark." Tavik hesitated. "Where should we go?" Daniel looked beyond the settlement, following the slope of a dried-out riverbed cutting through the valley floor. "There, a ravine. It'll give us natural walls on both sides and one way in. Easier to defend." They began the grim search, pulling aside crates and broken doors. Daniel found an old comms unit still functional enough to broadcast a short-range signal, which he adjusted to repeat a simple survival code. "If any survivors are in range," Daniel told Zevik, "they'll hear this." By dusk, they'd gathered a few meager supplies, water packs, a working stove, a couple of medical kits. Daniel gave the order to head out. They left the settlement in the fading light, moving toward the dry riverbed. As they hiked, Daniel felt a weight lift from his chest, the relief of leaving a ghost town behind. But Cavor was not finished testing them. From a shattered ridge above, 2 yellow eyes blinked in the gloom, tracking the small group as they vanished down the valley. Night on Cavor settled in quickly, swallowing the last dull light behind a wall of ragged cliffs. Daniel's group had reached the dry riverbed and built a temporary camp among fractured stones, hidden from open sight. He'd chosen this spot for its natural barriers, one way in, high ground, and a shallow cave perfect for shelter. Tavik and 2 other soldiers set motion sensors at the entrance while Daniel showed them how to spread ashes around the perimeter to catch footprints in the dark. The cold deepened as hours passed. Daniel lay awake, his back against the cave wall, listening to Cavor's unsettling quiet. Every now and then, a breeze carried a smell of scorched plant life and sour minerals. A muffled snap echoed down the ravine. Daniel sat up at once, hand on the simple utility blade he still preferred to their plasma sidearms. Tavik stepped closer. Something tripped the far sensor. Daniel nodded and signaled everyone to stay low. He edged toward the opening, checking the layered ground. Sure enough, the ash revealed a fresh track. 3 wide toes, heavy, clawed, set close together. "Big," Daniel whispered. "Heavy, too." Zevik joined him, eyes narrowing. "Do we engage?" Daniel shook his head. "We learn its pattern first." The creature moved again, stirring the scrub farther down the ravine. Daniel glimpsed a huge silhouette, spiked along its back, stalking slow and low. Its nostrils glowed faintly in the dark, tasting the air. He motioned Tavik to prepare a distraction. Tavik pulled a thermal beacon from his belt and tossed it high across the ravine, the small device flashing in a false heat signature. The predator lunged at the decoy in a blur of muscle and horns, tearing at the rock where the beacon fell. Daniel saw the chance, rallying the group. "Quiet. Move now," he hissed. They retreated deeper into the cave, closing a metal gate they'd rigged from settlement scrap. Daniel showed Tavik how to jam the mechanism with a spike so nothing could shove it open from outside. The beast prowled a while longer, frustrated, scraping the gate with claws that rang like iron across the frame. Then, as quickly as it came, it vanished into the dark again, leaving only a fading trail of sulfur stink behind. Zevik looked at Daniel with steady respect. That was quick thinking. Daniel nodded, though he felt no triumph, only focus. "Tomorrow," he said, "we track its territory so we don't stumble into its hunt again." He forced himself to rest, knowing morning would bring more dangers, and that on Cavor, every night was a test of who would be predator and who would be prey. Dawn on Cavor came with a smoky yellow haze, dull and sour against the jagged peaks. Daniel guided the soldiers back out of the cave, wary of any sign the predator might still be close. Ash had drifted over their tracks, but the spiked footprints were clear enough to remind them they were not alone. He led them through a dry channel that cut past a wrecked power relay station. A broken antenna still sparked in the breeze, humming like an insect. Daniel scanned the area for movement, spotting old ration packets scattered around a hatch half hidden in the rubble. "There," he said, pointing. "Someone's been here." Tavik advanced cautiously, scanning with his wrist sensor. "I'm picking up faint life signs, Daniel." They approached the hatch together. Daniel rapped on the metal, then waited. A muffled voice came from inside, hoarse and wary. "Who's there?" "Rescue team," Daniel answered. "We're here to help. I need you to open the hatch." A pause. Then the locks clicked, and the hatch creaked open to reveal 6 ragged engineers, their eyes sunken from dehydration, faces marked by smoke and dirt. The lead engineer, a woman with a name patch reading Emma, tried to stand straight but nearly collapsed. Daniel stepped forward and caught her before she fell. "How long since you've had clean water?" he asked. Emma swallowed, voice raw. 3 days. Daniel passed her a sealed hydration pouch. She clutched it like gold, gulping desperately. The others followed, hands trembling. Tavik radioed in a short status report while Daniel took stock. Their injuries were basic but painful. Burns, twisted ankles, malnutrition. He started prioritizing what could be treated on the move. "Anyone else with you?" he asked. Emma shook her head. "We tried to hold the settlement, but the predators, they tore through our barricades. The rest ran. I don't know where." Daniel steadied her. "We'll find them if we can, but first we get you out of here." He showed Emma how to lace up a makeshift brace on her injured leg, using a section of scavenged polymer. Then he divided the engineers between the Cerothian soldiers, so no one was left alone or unguarded. As they left the hatch, Daniel scanned the ridges again. Nothing moved, but he refused to let down his guard. By nightfall, they had reached another secure ravine. Daniel set up heat shields to keep the engineers warm, while Zevik organized the soldiers in a perimeter watch. Daniel sat with Emma by a dying camp light, checking her vitals. "You ever done anything like this before?" Emma asked him, voice ragged but calm. "Not off-world," Daniel admitted, adjusting her pulse sensor. "But survival is survival. Some rules don't change." Emma gave a thin smile. "Then I'm glad you're on our side." Daniel nodded. The night pressed in again, but he was already thinking of the next steps: how to find more survivors, how to keep these ones breathing, and how to lead them all out of Cavor alive. By morning, the engineers were strong enough to move, though they limped and leaned on each other like wounded birds. Daniel pushed them to eat a little more of the ration packs before they left, knowing they'd burn every calorie on the march. The extraction coordinates Zevik had supplied were still 2 days away, across a canyon lined with sharp basalt ridges and prone to sudden landslides. Worse, aerial scouts had spotted a nest of large flying predators near the only crossing. Daniel studied the map in the faint glow of his wrist beacon. The bridge they needed was half collapsed, leaving only twisted supports and a narrow catwalk wide enough for single file. He gathered the group in a hushed circle. "These creatures hunt by sound," he explained. "They'll pick up even a cough. If you drop gear or slip, they'll be on us." Emma looked uneasy. "What do we do if they attack?" Daniel glanced at the steel catwalk. "We keep moving. If they come close, aim for the eyes, but only if you have no other choice." The engineers nodded, trying to hold their fear in check. Daniel led them forward just as the morning wind kicked up, carrying dust through the canyon. They stepped carefully along the catwalk, boots clanging against corroded metal plates. Every sound felt huge. Daniel's gut tightened with each echo. Halfway across, a young engineer named Marcus lost his grip and let a canteen rattle down the beams. The cry of a predator split the air a moment later, a harsh screech that seemed to tear through the dusty silence. "Move!" Daniel barked. Shadows circled above, leathery wings blotting out the pale sun. Daniel counted 3 of them, diving fast. He shoved Marcus behind a support beam, then grabbed his flare pistol and fired high, dazzling the birds with a burst of sudden light. They veered away, confused, but not for long. "Keep going!" he shouted, herding the engineers over the last segment of the catwalk. Tavik and another soldier fired carefully at the closest creature, their plasma bolts tracking its wing membranes. The lead predator screamed and tumbled into the ravine, but the second one dove straight at Daniel. Daniel ducked, swung up the butt of his rifle, and smashed it across the snout as it lunged. The creature reeled, its claws scraping sparks from the bridge, then flapped away with a frustrated shriek. Emma grabbed Daniel's arm as they reached solid ground. "Thank you," she gasped. He only nodded, eyes still scanning the skies. The other 2 predators gave up the chase, gliding back to their nest. Daniel gathered everyone in a tight huddle. "No more mistakes," he warned. "That was too close." They moved onward, away from the canyon, with the engineers now clinging to each other in silent gratitude. Daniel felt no pride, only relief that no one had fallen. They still had miles to go, and he knew Cavor would not grow kinder the closer they got to their escape point. The path to the extraction zone wound through a field of jagged volcanic glass, scattered like knives across the slope. Each step had to be tested, each foothold balanced, to keep from slicing through boots or stumbling. Daniel paused every few minutes to let the engineers catch up. Their movements had steadied, though the fear in their eyes had not faded. Zevik walked beside him, silent until they reached a ridge where a shallow basin stretched below, marked by an old landing pad and a burned comm tower. "That's the extraction site," Zevik said. "We have confirmation that a ship will arrive tomorrow." Daniel studied the field. "That place is wide open. We'll be sitting ducks." Zevik lowered his voice. "There's something else." Daniel turned, seeing the tension on the alien's face. "The command has ordered a priority retrieval," Zevik continued. "They want the engineers left behind if it becomes risky. Only the mission data matters." Daniel's jaw clenched. "They're civilians. We're not leaving them." "It is not my choice," Zevik said, voice quiet, "but I will not stop you if you defy that order." Daniel felt a tight knot in his chest. He looked at Emma, sitting on a rock to rest her ankle, at Marcus sharing ration packs with a tired young soldier. These people had survived fire, monsters, and fear. Leaving them would be a crime. "No," Daniel said firmly. "We save everyone." Zevik's gaze sharpened. "Then you must plan to hold that field." Daniel turned to his map, memorizing every bit of cover and slope. "If they try to land under fire, we'll use smoke to block line of sight. These engineers have steady hands. I'll teach them to manage basic defense." Zevik nodded. "I will support your decision." The alien soldiers around them stirred restlessly when Zevik quietly relayed Daniel's plan. A few looked unsure, but none spoke out. Daniel gathered Emma and Marcus. "Listen," he said, steady and calm. "Command wants you left behind. We won't allow it. Tomorrow we stand our ground together. That means you help us hold the perimeter." Emma straightened, fire in her eyes despite exhaustion. "What do you need us to do?" "Help me build barriers from scrap," Daniel said. "We'll block as many approach paths as possible, and if anything comes for us, you sound the alarm." All around them, the team started moving, piling metal sheets, stacking rock walls, digging shallow trenches. Tavik and two other soldiers practiced setting up energy shields to brace the gaps. Through it all, Daniel kept one thought clear in his mind. They will leave no one behind. When night came, a red moon rose over Cavor, casting its strange glow across the battered camp. Daniel sat awake, back against a fuel drum, watching stars slip overhead. Whatever happened at dawn, he would not let fear break these people. Not here. Not now. The dawn on Cavor was stained a deep orange, casting sharp, angled shadows across the battered landing pad. Daniel's makeshift barricades were ready, reinforced with steel plates and loose rock. Soldiers crouched behind them, weapons powered up, eyes darting to the sky. The engineers, nervous but focused, helped wire up trip alarms with bits of salvaged cable. Daniel checked each line himself, making sure they wouldn't fail if a predator or hostile unit broke through. Above them, the dull rumble of an incoming ship rolled through the thin air. "Eyes up," Daniel called out. The Seroth extraction ship swept over the ridge, its running lights blinking a pattern Daniel recognized from Zevik's briefing. But a second shuttle followed close behind, darker, marked with command symbols Daniel had learned to distrust. Zevik's voice came over comms. "That is the strike team. They intend to recover data only. No civilians." Daniel cursed under his breath. "We hold the line." As the first extraction shuttle descended, the command shuttle dropped soldiers in angular black armor who started pushing toward the engineers. Their weapons were aimed to intimidate, not negotiate. Daniel stepped between them and Emma. "These people go on that ship," he said, pointing. A Seroth strike officer leveled a plasma sidearm at him. "Stand down, human." Behind Daniel, Tavik and the other soldiers raised their own rifles, forming a protective semicircle around the engineers. "Go ahead," Daniel warned, voice flat. "Try it." The moment hung tense. Then one of the engineers panicked, kicking a loose crate, sending it clattering across the concrete. That broke the spell. The strike officer barked an order, and a burst of fire hissed past Daniel's head. He dropped flat, rolling behind a fuel drum, and returned a shot from his rugged projectile rifle, the slug slamming into the officer's shoulder and spinning him to the ground. The engineers scrambled, diving behind makeshift barriers as the camp turned to chaos. Tavik and Zevik advanced in a disciplined push, covering the engineers' retreat to the safer shuttle. "Emma, move!" Daniel shouted, grabbing her by the sleeve and dragging her toward the ramp. A strike soldier lunged to block them. Daniel tackled him, driving a knife up through the side of his armor, then twisting away before the body fell. The engineers clambered into the shuttle one by one, Emma shouting roll calls as they boarded. Daniel helped Marcus limp across the last few meters, then turned to cover Zevik's withdrawal. The second shuttle lifted, unable to secure its orders, as Tavik fired a final shot into its engine cowling. Flames spurted from its vent port, sending it spinning away. "Everyone in," Daniel called. The ramp began to rise as he pulled himself up with one final grab, shoulders burning. The shuttle's pilot punched them skyward, engines roaring, and the ground fell away in a swirl of black rock and metal shards. Daniel dropped to one knee, breathing hard, looking at Emma and the other engineers, still alive, still holding on. They had escaped. The shuttle roared through Cavor's upper atmosphere, shuddering with turbulence, then finally broke free into quiet orbit. Daniel felt the shift in gravity and let out a long breath, staring through the porthole at the fractured surface below. Emma was seated across from him, pale and hollow-eyed, but alive. She offered him a grateful nod. The Seroth pilot guided the craft into a docking port on the command carrier, which bristled with lights and weapon mounts, floating against a field of distant stars. Once the lock sealed, Daniel helped Emma to her feet and guided her toward the airlock. Inside, the carrier felt impossibly clean and sterile after Cavor. White walls hummed with quiet energy, and the corridors smelled of antiseptic and machinery. A small delegation waited near the main hangar, Seroth officials in pristine uniforms, guarded, distant. Zevik stepped forward, ignoring them, and addressed Daniel directly. "The engineers are safe because of you," he said, "and because of your refusal to abandon them." Daniel nodded. They deserved better than being left behind. One of the officials stepped forward, a tall figure with pale green skin and clipped speech. "Daniel Walker, you disobeyed a retrieval protocol and jeopardized critical data." Daniel straightened his shoulders, meeting the alien's gaze without blinking. "I protected human lives. That was the mission you gave me." Zevik interrupted smoothly. "And he succeeded. These people survived, and the mission data is intact." There was a pause, tension thick enough to cut. Finally, the official turned away, signaling retreat. Daniel looked at Zevik. "So what now?" Zevik gestured down the corridor. "Our high command wishes to offer you a contract. Teach our soldiers what you know, how to survive, how to adapt. Cavor was not the only world where we struggle." Daniel considered it, remembering the fire, the fear, the raw grit of Cavor. Earth had always called him home, but after what he'd seen, going back to a quiet life seemed small. "You'd back me up?" he asked. Zevik nodded, without hesitation. Daniel studied the engineers one more time, seeing their relief, their strength beginning to return. Then he turned back to the Seroth officer. "All right," he said. "I'll teach your people, but on one condition." The officer raised a thin eyebrow. "Which is?" Daniel smiled, rough and tired but sure. "Next time, I pick the planet." Zevik laughed, a brief, honest sound, and gestured for Daniel to follow. Together they walked toward the briefing chambers, the lights of the Seroth flagship gleaming ahead, ready for the next mission.